Okay, guys, let's do a quick testing before we officially begin here. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Let me know if you can hear me through the webinar. Testing, 1, 2, 3. We all good? Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our eLotus webinar today. I can't believe it's already October in 2020. Hopefully, the pandemic here in the US will be ending soon, crossing our fingers, because this has been the longest year in history, I feel. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. My name is Donna, and I will be your host and your moderator for today's event. Today's webinar is being recorded and presented by Lotus Institute of Integrative Medicine. Here at eLotus, we have been hosting educational courses for over 2 decades, and we are proud to be your trusted source for premium CEU content. On behalf of eLotus, I want to thank you so much for being here today and choosing eLotus as your CEU provider. So out of curiosity, how many of you have learned with Dr. Henry McCann in the past? If so, please let me know in the chat room, and make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see. Oops. And I'm going to pull up my, is it down here? Oh, okay. Here we go. The chat, perfect. Oh, I see you guys. Yay, we have a lot of people returning. A few people who are new. I see. Okay, so welcome back to our returning students, and hello to our new ones. Dr. Henry McCann is one of our favorite Master Tung instructors for his clear and to-the-point teaching style. You're really going to love him. He holds nothing back and is extremely generous with his knowledge. If you've never taken a class with him before, he will be added to your favorites list very quickly. And if you have been a previous student, I definitely know why you're back. All right, today's class is Tung's Acupuncture and Herbs for Geriatric Conditions with Dr. Henry McCann. This course will give you an overview of aging as seen through the lens of Chinese medicine. And you'll learn how to apply Master Tung's acupuncture and herbs to treat conditions related to aging. We have 3 groups with us joining us today. Our first group is our Watch It Free group. You registered for today's webinar using a coupon code for free access to today's live event only. Now, if you would like to earn CEUs or get the 4-week video replay, you can upgrade to our second group, our paid group. Group 2 paid attendees receive CEU credit and can rewatch the contents of today's class for as many times as you like for a whole month. And I'll go ahead and enter that link for you in the chat room once I get back to my computer on how you can sign up and receive CEUs, as well as the video replay. And finally, our last group, our third group, is our Go Pass members. Go Pass members have unlimited access to all of our online courses of over 3,000 hours of video, and it includes live webinars just like today's class. So you don't have to pay again. Gold Pass members can also access any of our English courses for as long as you are a member. Plus, you receive special perks from our industry sponsored. I'd also like to take this time to thank Evergreen Herbs for sponsoring today's event for free, as well as thanking all of the Evergreen customers out there. When you choose Evergreen as your herb provider, you're also choosing to invest in the advancement of TCM and provide opportunities like today in which you and your colleagues can attend free educational courses that will fine-tune your skills. Thank you so much for your support. Now, before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So the webinar today is set to run from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We are on Pacific time. The lunch will be from about 1 to 2 p.m. and there will be 2 breaks in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So what you're seeing on your screen, since you're using Zoom, you can play with there's like a toggle in the middle. You can play with it to see if you want the video feed larger or if you want the PowerPoint larger. It's up to you. And then you can also choose to open your chat up or close it, and you can just play along with it. If you're chatting, though, make sure to send your chat to all panelists and attendees. It's automatically set to all panelists. I'm not sure why Zoom does that. I hope they fix it so that if you set it to all attendees as well, everyone else can see what you're what you're asking if you have any questions, and that way they can help answer it for you. And then the Q&A option, please only send questions to Henry regarding today's class. There's some people who will write thank you or leave comments. Just to keep things organized, if you can just have questions pertaining to the class only, the class topic only. And okay. Oops. Oh, sorry about this. Where am I? Okay, here I am. Okay, and then for those of you who are who have registered and paid for today's class or Gold Pass members, and you need the credit, make sure you're logged in with us the entire day. And other than that, you do get the 4-week video replay, which I'll email you when that's ready on Monday. And the quiz for the class will also be ready the next day. And all that information will be emailed to you personally by me. All right, so that's all the housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar with a brief introduction of Dr. Henry McCann, who is the author and co-author of Dome books, Pricking the Vessels, Bloodletting Therapy, in which he has a bloodletting class with us if you want to watch that later, and Practical Atlas of Tung's Acupuncture, respectfully. He earned his diploma from the New England School of Acupuncture and his doctoral degree from the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine. As part of his doctoral studies, he interned at Chengdu University of Chinese Medicine in Sichuan, China. He is also a faculty member at PCOM New York and other doctoral degree programs in the U.S. All right, so at this time, we're going to go ahead and welcome Henry to the webinar. And I'll go ahead and stop my share here. Henry, you can start yours.
Okay, before I start the presentation, everyone can hear me okay, by the way? I think the sound check before was good. You're hearing me on your end, Donna?
Yeah,
good.
I'm hearing you.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm curious before we go into the actual presentation, how many of you are brand new to Tung's acupuncture? Just very new, either brand new or really very early on. So you can go ahead and type into the chat if you are new. Okay. All right. So there's at least a bunch of you who are new and early on. So what we're going to do, so these kinds of classes are always a challenge in that we want to try to make the material relevant to people who are complete newbies. So I will try to give at least a brief introduction to the system without going into all the detail that we do in some of the basic classes, because it's important to understand the rest of the material and context. And then I know certainly a lot of you have been here before, and it's great to see so many people back, including so many people who look to be very experienced in Tung's acupuncture. You know, I saw that Robert Chu is here, and you know, Robert is a fantastic teacher, and Dr. Chu also has some great classes here on eLotus. And so it puts me on the spot to be in front of so many really very experienced Tung people, but we'll do the best we can and see where we can go. So today, the basic goal is first to give us an overview of the topic. And so we're going to be looking at Tung's acupuncture today through the lens of geriatric medicine. Geriatric medicine is something that I really have a passion for. I really think that it's an important topic for us all to be aware of, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's an important topic for us to be aware of. My own doctoral degree specialty is in geriatric medicine. So some of the introductory material here, just a short piece of the introductory material here, is taken from my lectures at the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine, where we do an entire year of study in geriatrics. And I do their introduction segment. So we do several days of an introduction, and this is just a small segment from that introduction. The rest of it, the Tung's acupuncture for geriatric medicine, is something that we don't do there specifically per se. So this will be some new material, at least new presentation for you all here today. For those of you who are brand new to Tung's acupuncture, I do think that we can use this as an entryway into the system to help us understand a bigger picture of how this specific approach to acupuncture how it works from both the sort of inside theoretical framework, but then how it works in clinical practice as well. But I definitely encourage you all who are brand new to get some books, or there are some really great classes here on eLotus. I've certainly done some basic classes before. Make sure see my mic volume is up. Let me see if is that a little better for volume on your end? As long as everyone can hear me okay. If not, then perhaps the tech team over at eLotus can help troubleshoot. Anyway, so my suggestion is there are some excellent classes here on eLotus. I'm very impressed with the eLotus team, which is why I've continued to do classes with them for so long. With everyone, it's really fantastic. And the amount of material that's really very good and in-depth in Tung's acupuncture from fantastic teachers who all really teach from their heart and teach from their own clinical experience, which is really the best combination possible. And they teach from the heart, and that there's nothing held back, that they really are trying to educate people so that the system can continue to grow, expand, and be used clinically. So there's this discussion frequently in Chinese medicine about, if anyone's been around Chinese medicine for a long time, there are this idea of secret techniques, right? And so, everyone, I think a lot of us who went into Chinese medicine, especially those of us who went into Chinese medicine around the time that I did, more than 20 years ago now, it was hard to get information. And there is this cultural trend in China to have this idea of secret techniques, right? One of my Buddhist teachers many years ago had told me very bluntly that secret techniques in medicine in particular brought really very negative karmic attachments because it's antithetical to the principle of medicine as an art of compassion. And so if you believe that what you do in medicine is really the best you can do, it's your duty to try to get as many other people doing this as you. And so my own opinion on this idea is that if I think that this is really the best that I have to offer in terms of acupuncture and what's worked for me best clinically, then it's my duty to spread the information, everything that I know, as much as I possibly can. And so I encourage you all to do that as well. These are not state secrets. They're not keeping people safe by keeping them secret. They're putting people away from good medical treatment if we don't pass on the information as much as we can. And so the teachers here on eLotus have done that, and I think really done so admirably. So I would encourage you who are brand new to the system to really get on some of the eLotus classes here that are geared more towards beginners as well. And this will be fine for you as a general introduction, but I think there are some other great classes that give even more sort of foundational background. And it's not just my classes. There are so many really good Tung practitioners who are presenting here that I really encourage you all to do it. All right, so that's my brief introduction. Let me pull up our presentation and we'll get started. Okay. So this is an exercise that I did for myself. Actually, this is from a couple of years ago. I should redo it again every year just to see. So one week before I was going out to Portland to teach this material for my students in Oregon. Hold on one second, make sure I get. Anyway, what I did was I just went back and I looked through my previous day. So if I was flying out on a Thursday, I looked at my Wednesday and I just thought to myself, let me start listing some of the common conditions that I would have seen. So this list actually is just one day out of my office that I saw several years ago before one weekend when I was teaching this introductory material. And this, I would suspect that this is probably a similar kind of list to the types of things that you see in your clinic. I remember going in this years ago, 20 plus years ago when I was first starting, I remember waking up one morning and thinking to myself, gee, I hope I don't just treat low back pain for the rest of my life. And that's basically it. And honestly, that would have been realistically, that certainly has come to be not the case at all. So this is what I treat. This is a typical day in my clinic. So we see a lot of pain cases, but we see oftentimes chronic pain cases. I certainly see acute injuries in my office, but honestly, in my clinic, they're much less frequent than the more ongoing chronic stuff. My fantasy is, I know Elotus is in California, and I've said this before, my fantasy about California, and I've been told many times this is not the truth, but I like to hold on to my fantasy. The mythology is important to me. My fantasy about California is everyone has an acupuncturist at birth, and they all go to see them first before they see any Western doctor, because everyone is very progressive in terms of their medical thought. New Jersey is not that way. I've been told again that California is really not that way, but I still like to hold on to that idea. So when I see patients who I tell them I usually say it's because I'm the last stop on the train line. They've gone to see everyone else first, and then they finally come into my clinic, unless they're familiar with my treatment and they come to see me before doing something else. So this is what I see. The pain conditions I see are chronic and what we in Chinese medicine call knotty conditions, difficult to treat. We have all sorts of degenerative conditions, autoimmune mediating conditions. I see internal medicine problems. So we see things like diabetes. I do a lot of supportive care for cancer patients. And so this is a typical day for me. This is not an unusual day. So this is where we are. And I think this is one of the reasons why we'll see that this idea of geriatrics is actually kind of an important idea. So this is from the NCCOM job task analysis. This is a little old, this citation, but I think it's probably still fairly accurate, that most of us who practice desatiation medicine do treat all sorts of chronic recalcitrant complex disorders. Most of our patients have multiple complaints. I joke with my patients all the time that I have two kinds of patients, and the second is more common. The first one, I have my intake sheets, like most of you probably do in your clinic. The first kind just checks off like one or two things and writes, I have headache, and that's it. And then the rest of the intake is completely blank. The second kind of patient, which is the more common, is it's like every page is full and they turn it over and they write in the margins because they have all this stuff going on. These are the kinds of patients who oftentimes come to see us, and we'll see that even if they are not elderly, they still may very well fall into this sort of concept of geriatric medicine. So one of the things we'll see shortly is that geriatric medicine is not solely defined simply by the number, but rather by a common sort of set of patterns or presentations. One of them tends to be that they have multiple complaints, and they can be quite chronic. So this is from the job task analysis. Just also to let people know, as a little bit of housekeeping. Most of the time I'm lecturing, I don't necessarily have the chat and other things pulled up in front of me all the time. You can feel free to ask questions and type into the chat room. I may or may not see them right away, but we'll try to get to questions at least after breaks. And I know Donna on that other end can start collating some of the better questions that she thinks are potentially more important, more relevant. So let's get back to this. What we see here on the left is a Chinese character, and I'm not sure if I can type into the chat box. Let me see if I can. I don't really know how I can I don't know how I can change my keyboard here. So maybe we'll do this a little bit afterwards. I'll just describe this character for you. Usually when I'm doing this in person over at the Elotus studios in sunny Southern California, we can do this on the whiteboard, but we'll just have to take a look. So this character here that you see in the slide is a character that's pronounced Gu. And this is a character that we see, and you'll see it shortly, within the early classical medical literature that usually refers to a type of disease we're going to be talking about today. So if we look at the character on the inside of it, you'll see where there's a cross and a little box underneath, right? So that cross and that box underneath is also a character that's pronounced Gu. This one is the third tone, Gu. That character with the cross and the box underneath means something that's ancient, old. The character itself is comprised of the cross, which is the character shirt, which is the number 10 in Chinese. The box by itself is the character ko, which means mouth. So what is something old? Something is old because it's been taught through the mouth of 10 generations. That's a sort of basic etymology of the character. Now, let's put the box around that character on the inside for old. This is another character pronounced gu, but it's a different tone. It's gu. When we put the box around the character for old, this means something that's solid, something that's firm, or it can be used as a verb to make solid or to make firm. This is a treatment strategy in Chinese medicine that means to do things like to astringe. So if we think about what's old in Chinese medicine, if we think metaphorically what's old, we think of old as being related to ancestry, being related to our inheritance. So the substance that's old in the body metaphorically is the Jing essence, source qi and Jing essence. This then is a treatment strategy that's used, that's associated commonly with things like the Jing essence. So when we're looking at, for example, astringing the essence or holding on or making firm the essence, this is one of the characters we use to describe that concept. Now, the outside of the character, which has these 3 small ticks and then sort of a half a box, this is a radical, which is a part of the character that gives us some hint of meaning. And this specifically is the disease radical. So when we see this on the outside of a character, it gives us the idea that now this is some sort of state of disease. Now, this character, also pronounced gu, same tone as the to consolidate, means a disease that's very chronic, very difficult, very knotty, very recalcitrant. So this is the kind of disease we will potentially be talking about when we're looking at this concept of geriatrics, because we're looking at these, as we see in this idea from the job task analysis, we see chronic, recalcitrant, and complex disorders. Okay. So the other reason why this is important is not only because it's the kind of patient we see frequently in our clinics, at least the ones that I see in my clinics, is because we are in a period of time where the aging of the population is happening in a way that it has never happened before in human history. So again, these statistics are, some of them, it's a mixed statistic, some of them are also a little old, but again, I think that these statistics probably still hold true today. The number of people worldwide who are 65 and older is projected to be a huge number, right? So we're going from what we saw in 2010, about 524 million, to over 1.5 billion, with most of the increases happening actually in developed countries. We're seeing these increases already in developing countries, and we're seeing these changes happening about now. Here in North America by 2025, which is at this point really just around the corner, hopefully we'll be out of the pandemic by then, but really just around the corner, we're going to see this upper age of the population, above middle age, to be almost a quarter of the entire population. And so this is a significant shift in the demographics. So we can take a look at this slide. This is the general percentage of young people and older people as a percentage of the global population, and the change in about a 100-year period of time. So we can see that as a part of the global population, at this point now, 70 years ago, we're in 2020 now, at this point 70 years ago, the percentage of the population over the age of 65 was a much smaller percentage of the entire population. And projected another 30 years into the future, we see that change dramatically. So there is, especially in developing nations, there's a significant decline in the rate of children, right? So people are having fewer children in general. This is not the same in every country, certainly, but it is definitely a trend in North America. It's a trend in Europe significantly. In Japan, it's been a trend for so long that the Japanese government is worried about this. And the percentage of elderly is going up significantly. According to one of the last census, the information we have from the census, we can see that compared to 1900, so this is 110 years difference from this in 2010, there were 12 times the number of people over the age of 65 than there were basically a century ago. Significant change. One of the things we'll also see is that, although I don't think I included slides for this, is that one of the causes of mortality are also dramatically changing. So 100 years ago, definitely 150 and more years ago, the main causes of mortality were things like infection, injury, those sort of things. Today, the main causes of mortality are things like cardiovascular disease, cancer, and other long-term degenerative conditions. So the things that we are suffering from in terms of our older population, in terms of the population of people that will potentially be treating more and more, is dramatically changing, right? So one of the things we see, for example, in Chinese, there's a common folk saying that most, when I've been in China, most everyone knows the saying. It says 中医治本. So Chinese medicine treats the root, and then 西医治标, so Western medicine treats the branch, right, or the symptom. Now, honestly, I don't think this is really true. Clearly, Chinese medicine is really good at both treating root and branch, treating symptom and underlying cause. And if we're being honest, Western medicine oftentimes can do the same as well. But the common sort of concept that we see within people's minds is that Chinese medicine has this ability to really sort of address root issues that are in patients. And so this is then, and I do think that Chinese medicine sometimes addresses these very chronic conditions very effectively and with much fewer side effects than some Western, the sort of other associated Western treatments. And we'll see one of the reasons why this population of patients is coming to us is precisely because of that concern over side effects and other issues with taking either pharmaceutical products, doing surgeries, whatever it happens to be. So one of the things that we can do is really offer fantastic treatment to this population, and this population is dramatically exploding. Interestingly, also the oldest of old, so people 85 years and above, is one of the fastest growing populations in the world, and definitely in the United States. So people over the age of 90 are expected to quadruple between 2010 and 2050, and I believe this is still on track. I keep on joking with my wife that she married poorly because my grandmother, who is having some health issues right now, but she's still very much alive, is 96 going on 97. And her older sister, who is still alive, is going to be 99 this January. My grandmother came from a family of 9 children, 8 girls and 1 boy. I'm sure much to the chagrin of my one uncle, and all 8 of them, or all 9 of them, one of them has passed away, only one of them, and the rest are all above the age of 80 at this point. So my poor wife is going to have to deal with me for a very long time. Unfortunately for her, I fear, and I'm going to lose my hearing, and there's not much we can do about that. That seems to be her lot in life. So this population is really an important population for every healthcare provider. I don't care whether you're a Western medicine provider or a Chinese medicine provider, because this is going to be a significant, bigger chunk of who we will see. Hold on one second. There we go. That's the slide. So this is, again, similar information. We're seeing the population age 65 and over. I think I've hit this idea home for you. And so this is something that we see in census data that's coming out, and we also see this in studies related to around the world. So this is a change, percentage change in the world population by age between 2010 and 2050. So we can see people under the age of 64 are growing, that age group is growing at the slowest rate. The 100 and plus, which again is still a small percentage of the population, but the number of them that are there is growing exponentially. So people are living because of better, so it's not only because of better procedures or better surgeries or better drugs, it's also because we have better public health initiatives, we have more clean water around the world, we have better sanitation around the world, but people who are older are certainly growing faster and faster. Now, this is again an idea of how people are living and what we're seeing. So we can see again that the conditions people are suffering from over time are also changing. So now the majority of deaths we can see from this slide are from things like cancer, cerebrovascular disease, heart disease. So this is mostly going away from infectious to non-communicable diseases. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Chinese medicine now that we know the basic background. So this is a quote. Many of you who've been around me know that I like to go back to other non-medical classics. I think if you're a good Chinese medicine practitioner and you really want to practice Chinese medicine well, we should also be reading other books that would have been read by people who were famous doctors throughout Chinese history. You know, every famous doctor throughout Chinese history before the year 1900 who could read or write, and many of them could not. Many of them were illiterate, but the ones who were literate all read the books of Confucius. They read the other philosophical texts of China. So this is from the Analects of Confucius, of Kongfuzi, or Kongzi. So Zulu is one of his students. He says he wants to hear about the master's aspirations. Like, what is the master being Confucius? What is his desire? And then Confucius said, the master said, to bring comfort to the aged, to inspire trust in my friends, and to cherish the young. So part of the impetus for the desire of treating geriatric conditions is this impetus of a core value of society. And it's, you know, certainly a core value of traditional Chinese society. I grew up in a big Italian family here in New Jersey. Despite my last name, I'm half Italian. And in my family, this idea is the same. You know, we're trying to convince my grandmother now to move in with us because it's our job to hopefully take care of each other. And that's I think, part of how society should be built. So, you know, maybe Confucians and old Italians had something in common, that we wanted to bring comfort to the aged. And so that's, as a doctor, one of my goals is to bring comfort to patients. You know, we can't always cure patients, but to make their life more comfortable, more easy, and more happy, I think is an important goal for all of us to have. So this is also one of the prime motivations for doing what we do. Okay. So let's talk about the contents of geriatrics as a field of study, just so we can understand the whole thing. Certainly, we cannot do all of this in one day. This is geriatrics as a sort of specialty. So, for example, our doctoral students spend a lot more time learning at more of these different aspects of geriatric medicine. But what are the things we need to talk about when we're looking at this as a specialty? First, we have to define the field. We have to talk about what the theory of aging is, and we'll talk briefly about the theory of aging today. Study of disease characteristics, and we'll do that in short and brief today. We could certainly spend an entire 2 weeks talking about the disease characteristics of geriatric patients. I should also let you know that we're trying to change the name from geriatrics to simply care of the aging adult, because most people don't like to be called geriatric patients, because there certainly is there's a negativity associated with that term. And I think care of the aging adult is a better term, although I didn't think of it in time to change a lot of the terms in this presentation. There's also the study of specific rehabilitation and therapeutic methods. So that means, how do we treat these patients? And we'll be looking at how do we treat these patients today through the lens of Dong's acupuncture and through the lens of some herbal formulas. We're going to be focusing more on acupuncture, and I'll just be giving you some of my favorite herbal formulas for some of the conditions. Disease prevention, that's a huge topic, not one that we can really go into too much depth today. And then special cautions and contraindications, we'll be mentioning at least some of them when they're relevant. So first of all, let's define geriatrics as a field within Chinese medicine. So I've yet to be able to really identify a good definition from Chinese medical texts, or at least classical medical texts, to what qualifies a person as a geriatric patient. There is a discussion in the Tibetan medical tantras, and so even though Tibetan medicine doesn't really fall into East Asian medicine, it's a type of Asian medicine. I'm going to steal the definition from Tibetan medicine, which I think we can easily adopt into what we do. So we can see that one of the type of patient we see that can fall into this category is the aging patient. So, in ancient times, it might have been a little younger, maybe about 60 and above. Certainly people are living much longer, and they're more healthy for a lot longer. So I would say this would be number 70, the age 70 or above, or 75 and above. Although certainly this does not mean that every person over the age of 70 will be equally appropriate for these concepts. So the example I give is I have one patient who is in his, I think he's late 80s now, and he's a contractor, and he gets on the roof with his guys, and he works every day outside, and he climbs ladders, he does everything, and he comes to see me because he has plantar fasciitis. Everything else is fine in him. So he's not really a geriatric patient, even though age-wise maybe he's in there. So we still have to sort of think about, from the perspective of Chinese medicine, what are we seeing that's characteristic of these patients, and we'll get to that shortly. The second category of patients is people who are in generally poor health, even at a younger age. And these can be people who have premature aging issues, people who have had at a young age, for example, they're dealing with an aggressive cancer. So I would say that the vast majority of my patients in their 30s and 40s, if they're having to deal with an aggressive cancer, even if they become cancer survivors, for a period of time after they're cancer survivors, they're technically a geriatric patient, because their pattern, their presentation matches the presentation of what we were really trying to look at and what we'll be seeing. So people not necessarily over a certain age can also fall into this category. And the last is people who suffer from malnutrition. And malnutrition is something that is an issue. And it's not only an issue in developing countries. It's not only an issue, for example, in poorer populations. We can have malnutrition across the board. So let's take a look at that for a second. So what are some causes of malnutrition? In this case, especially in the aging patient, certainly there are medical causes. Some people have poor appetite. Some people, because of their health issues, have loss of sense of smell or taste, gastrointestinal disorders, respiratory conditions. So there may be a medical condition that causes poor appetite. I had an older patient recently who had a bleeding ulcer. We didn't really know she had a bleeding ulcer until we had some better workup within her Western medical realm. But she had complained of poor appetite for a long time. And in this case, her ulcer wasn't painful. It just caused her to have a really poor appetite. And so she ate very little. So she was anemic, and she was vitamin deficient. And once we addressed the bleeding ulcer with herbal medicine and with other conventional care, then appetite came back, and we didn't really have to worry about the anemia and other problems, right? So there are many conditions that can cause malnutrition. Lifestyle and social factors can cause malnutrition. Some people simply don't know how to cook for themselves. Some people are isolated or lonely and don't have the sort of desire to cook for themselves. Some people live in poverty, and we have patients who live in poverty. There are these things called food deserts, even within major metropolitan areas, places where supermarkets simply don't want to set up shop for fear of crime, because it's not in their financial best interest because of the demographic of the area. So people have sometimes lack of access to decent food and to food at all. Certainly psychological factors can cause people not to eat adequately. And patients in hospitals or long-term care facilities also frequently suffer from malnutrition because of all sorts of reasons. So this is something we also need to take in consideration, whether the patient is an aging adult or whether they're a bit younger as well. Let's go on to other ideas of benefits of geriatrics. So as a field of medicine, so in Tibetan medicine and even in Tibetan Buddhism, we want to know what are we trying to do? What's the benefit of actually caring about this population? So the goals and benefits of geriatrics as a field of medicine, again, this is taken from Tibetan medicine influences. For life extension, certainly we want to have patients live a long and healthy life. Remember that the Suwen, the simple questions, the first part of the Huangyi Neijing, the first chapter of this is called the Shanggu Tianzhen, the truth of heaven, as the treatise on the truth of heaven is passed down from very ancient times. And the very first question asked in the Neijing that is posed to Qibo, the physician teacher of the Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. Huangdi says, why is it people today are falling apart where in the good old days they lived to 100 years? And it seems to be from that discussion that the idea in Chinese medicine is 100 years is our birthright as humans. That's where we're supposed to be. And for whatever reason, we're not getting there. We're falling apart before that. And so life extension is simply the goal. Maintenance of physical function, organ function, mental acuity, all of these types of things are goals. It's not the same living to 100 in the last 40 years. The person is bedridden. We want to have as people living to a ripe old age and being really very happy, healthy, and sort of content with their life and able to function and be independent. One of the things we see commonly from elderly patients, one of the big fears is eventual lack of independence. And whether it's ability to drive, ability to cook for oneself, or even eventually the ability to do basic activities of daily living, like toileting, bathing. This is one of the biggest fears that we hear from our aging population is, I want to be able to take care of myself. So one of the other benefits of these ideas is not only life extension, but extension of physical functioning. Tibetan medicine also says enhanced fertility for the creation of future generations. I will leave that one to our classes on reproductive medicine. Okay, let's go on. So we also see that there's an increased use of CAM therapies in the aging population in the United States, and in particular, acupuncture and East Asian medicine are one of the most frequently used CAM therapies in the elderly. This is certainly higher in Asian respondents, at least in terms of the research that's out there. And you can see the citations. This research is actually fairly old. I would suspect that by now, if we were to redo these types of surveys, we would see an even higher higher utilization of Chinese medicine, of East Asian medicine by older patients. I live here in beautiful Madison, New Jersey. If anyone ever wants to come visit, I'll show you around town. My clinic is actually in the old YMCA building. And the old YMCA building here in Madison, interestingly, was used as an emergency hospital during the flu epidemic of 1918, right? So it's kind of interesting to me to be in an old emergency hospital doing telemedicine with COVID patients now. So it's kind of a interesting juxtaposition of history. But the building where I'm in now, the YMCA where I'm in now, which is now an office building, was where my grandmother and her sisters, because they were poor back in the 20s and 30s, it's where they came to shower because they didn't have indoor plumbing. So I have all of these older residents here in Madison. Many of them are from Italian-American backgrounds who would never have thought to use Chinese medicine. And we see all of them coming to use Chinese medicine now. Why? Because it works, and it really allows them access to care that they potentially need. So we're seeing an incredible explosion in population of utilization of our medicine. And my guess is in the future, we will only continue to see more. Okay, let's continue on a bit. So we can see that East Asian medicine therapies, including acupuncture, herbal medicine, et cetera, can be really very important in improving quality of life. And one of the reasons, as I mentioned before, in terms of surveys that we see, some of the renewed public interest in Chinese medicine is because of potential side effects and other issues that may be happening, including microbial resistance, other new emerging diseases. These are all real excellent reasons to turn to Chinese medicine. Okay, let me just see if there are any specific questions. Nothing in particular there. Okay, let's go on. I think so far so good. Let's go on to Chinese medicine and how Chinese medicine describes aging. Let me also get so I can check the time and keep aware of that. So these are some quotes from medical classics. This first one is from the 74th chapter of the Suen, which is, the name of the chapter is The Great Treatise on the absolute truth. So it's got to be good. It says here that heaven and earth are the great principles, and a person's Shen's spirit penetrates and reflects them. So I just want you to, we're going to chew on that idea, because everything, one of the previous lectures we did last year, I believe, we talked about this idea of principle, of great principle. And then we talked about the sort of juxtaposition of Qi and Yang, of like, which is really sort of principle and application. It becomes really very important in Chinese philosophy, and because of that, extends very deeply into Chinese medicine. So whenever we're trying to treat something, we initially need to go back to principle. And so one of the pitfalls I will caution everyone about when we're going through the material today is that everything eventually has to come back to principle. When we're giving you point protocols, the point protocols are the best protocols that I can offer based on my understanding of the material, but we still have to evaluate each patient individually for what they eventually need. So when I give you diabetes points, we can't simply say because of their Western medical diagnosis is diabetes, we can use these points in every circumstance. We still really have to evaluate and think about, is this specific treatment most appropriate for this patient? And to do that, we have to go back to understanding of core principle. So the biggest principle out of all the principles, at least according to what the Neijing is telling us, is this, is that heaven and earth, they're the greatest principle. And what that means can be many, many different things. One of the things that it can mean is this next line here. And this comes from the 44th chapter of the Ling Shu, which is, and this is a beautiful line. I love this line. It says that spring engenders, summer is this flourishing, this absolute expansive growth, right? That's what that really means there. Autumn is the movement of harvest, and winter is the movement of storage, right? So what we're trying here to see is this, what do the 5 phases really mean? Which is why the word, in my opinion, 5 elements is possibly the worst translation possible that we could have come up with to describe the wuxing, the 5 phases, because they're not solid elements, but rather movements. And what they are doing is they're representing a principle. So spring is wood, which is the movement of birth, upward, outward movement. Summer is fire, which is the greatest expansive of movement. Autumn is the harvesting, the bringing in, the contracting inwards, and winter is the movement of storage. And then we're not content to say that. After that, it says this is the constant, this is the Chang, this is the constant of Qi, and that humans also are in a state of resonance with this. But here the translation is reflect, but I think this idea of resonance, we're the image of, but also in harmonic resonance with this movement. This is what it's all about to some extent. And this is the fundamental, in my opinion, the basis of acupuncture, basis of herbal medicine. And hopefully we'll see some of that coming out as we're going through this, the next couple of hours for the rest of today. So this is a diagram. So someone asked the source of my translation of these texts. Some of the translations we'll see are mine. Some of the translations are taken from Unschuld. My opinion is that if you don't read the Chinese yourself, that the best translation you can get is Professor Unschuld's translation. You can disagree with me if you want, but I'm not going to change my mind. He's, in my opinion, the only really valid translator of the texts that I've read in English. I mean, there are other translations, but they're just not nearly as in-depth, and I don't think they render the material as effectively and honestly to the original as possible. Which is why if you go to the citations list at the end of the presentation, you'll see Professor Unschuld's translations in there. So in this diagram, and I apologize, I have to eventually translate this, give you the English translations for all of this. This is describing in diagrammatic form what we just talked about. So where it says yang expands outwards, we see on the side. So if we're looking at this like a clock at 9 o'clock, it says spring engendering, giving birth. At the top, this is that 12 o'clock, it's summer flourishes. On the 3 o'clock here, it's autumn harvest, and the bottom is winter stores. And it's this constant cycling that keeps everything going. And so what we're seeing here also is a symbol that helps us understand the movement of the organs within the body. The middle character there is hua, which means transformation. So at 9 o'clock with spring, we have liver. At 12 noon, we have fire, heart. At 3 o'clock there, we have autumn, which is metal and the movement of lung. And at the bottom, we have kidney, movement of storage, holding in. This is, which is why we'll see certain point areas of the body being really important in geriatric medicine. We have this is holding in, this is the movement of water, and hua, transformation in the center, is the movement of soil. One of the other things I've been going to try to do over the course of the rest of my life is get people to stop saying earth element and say soil phase. And if you want to know why, come have tea with me in New Jersey. We can have a detailed discussion of why I think soil phase is better. Okay. So now let's look at this in terms of a Chinese viewpoint of aging. So there are different models of how aging happens in terms of Chinese medicine's understanding of aging. This is, so the chapter that most people are familiar with is probably the first chapter of the Suen. This is the treatise on the truth of heaven handed down from ancient times. And that chapter gives us the proverbial cycles of 7 and 8, right? Where women age in cycles of 7 and men age in cycles of 8 years, right? I'm here to tell you that my strong opinion is that you should not take that literally. I think that most of what we read in the classical texts, we need to read both literally as well as symbolically, trying to get us an idea of what is the principle they're trying to give us. I'm 110% sure you shouldn't take that literally, because other chapters of the Suen, or actually of the Neijing, in this case the Ling Shu, gives us alternate models of aging that aren't based on 7 and 8. So you can also come to me and visit me in New Jersey. We'll have coffee or tea, whatever you prefer, and talk about why 7 and 8 are symbols of something important and not to be taken literally. This is from the 54th chapter of the Ling Shu. This is not a direct translation. This is a summary of that chapter. You can go read the chapter to get a better overview. So what we're seeing, the two things happening that we see in red, is eventually the movement of yang qi in the body slowly breaks down, right? And so the movement of the qi becomes important. And as it breaks down, the movement of qi in blood becomes obstructed. Then the organ's abilities to hold onto and store vital substance also becomes impaired, which we'll see are two key concepts in a model of aging from the perspective of Chinese medicine. So the first thing that we see in this chapter is that at the age of 50, the liver function begins to decline, and it gives us all sorts of ideas of what's happening with liver function. Eventually, the heart becomes depleted and the qi of the shen becomes insufficient. Then we have the spleen and lung becoming vacuous as the upright qi, the zheng qi, starts to diminish. And at 90, the kidney is exhausted and the jing is depleted. So notice that this is also a symbolic, a symbolic sort of discussion. So because we're seeing here a 5-phase relationship pattern where it goes from wood to fire to soil, earth to, I'll try to say soil, earth, so don't confuse anyone, to metal to water. So we're seeing this also in a 5-phase cycle. Clearly not every patient will automatically do this, but what we're seeing over time, at least in this chapter on aging, is a gradual decline in the function of the viscera, the 5 viscera, and then a gradual decline in the circulation and movement, proper movement, the quality and quantity of circulation of vital substance in the body. Okay. Now, this is from that first chapter of the Suen. So this is one of the answers to why people are living a long life and why they can continue to reproduce even into old age. And here it says, in this case, so this person is very old, right? Very and healthy into old age. One of the reasons they can do this, it says, in this case, it's because the person's lifespan, the heavenly longevity, literally the lifespan exceeds what is normal. This next line is really important. It says the qi in the vessels are constant and flowing. So this flowing is the character tong. Tong is the same tong as in bu tong zi tong. When there's no movement, there's pain. Most TCM practitioners are aware of the idea that pain is a product of stagnation, right? So this is what we usually say, pain comes from stagnation. in that phrase, it's bu tong, so it's not movement. So here it means movement. If we look at on the bottom here, this is one of the things I like to do is when I can't sleep late at night, I will go and take interesting characters in Chinese and go back and look in what's this text called the Shuanjiezi, which is imagine the Oxford Unabridged English Dictionary, except it's 2,000 years old and it's Chinese. So this is for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a concordance. It's mapping one word with other words, but it's really a dictionary that would have been the dictionary 2,000 years ago. That's when it was written. So it gives us the etymology and the background and the meaning of characters. So here, this word tong, the definition of the word tong means to reach or to communicate. And what's even more fun than looking up the definitions is looking up the definition of the definition. So we can play word games. So if we look up the definition of tong, which means da, to communicate, to reach, we look at that definition. The definition of that character means to move without encountering resistance. So here, what the Neijing is telling us is that the characteristic of a person being able to be old, right, is that the person has adequate movement of qi and blood. And then it says at the end, the kidney qi is in surplus. So the kidney qi can mean kidney, or it can also be symbol of what kidney represents. And kidney represents that movement of winter, right? So let's think about that for a second and look at the next slide and sort of try to tease out then what we're trying to get at. And then the reason we age is because, again, we saw previously, our ability to hold, for the organs to hold on to substance, as well as the ability of circulating the qi starts breaking down. So here, this is another reason, this is another quote that talks about why people are falling apart. Still from the first chapter of the Suen, one of the reasons why they're falling apart is that because they don't know how to maintain fullness. And the character there in red, man, means fullness. What's the definition of fullness? The definition of fullness means being filled and overflowing. And one of those characters is the character, it's pronounced E-Y-I in pinyin romanization. And E is a homophone with E for medicine. So one of the ideas of medicine is to be able to provide this as a function of medicine, to help people maintain fullness. This is from the 8th chapter of the Suen. This is the treatise on the Linglan is the numinous orchid. I love the titles of the chapter. The numinous, or the spiritual orchid, is actually a reference to the secret imperial library of the emperor in ancient times. So it means this is really important stuff. This is the chapter that gives us the idea that the heart is the sovereign, it's the enlightened ruler, the lung is the minister of state, the prime minister, et cetera, et cetera. So here it says the kidney holds the office of forceful accomplishment and is the issuer of wondrous talents. So when we're looking at this idea of kidney, the kidney, before it says the kidney qi is in surplus, that helps us to define healthy aging. We have to understand what kidney represents. So kidney, one of the things that it says that here is the kidney is the office of forceful accomplishment. It's an issuer of wondrous talents. So one of the words here that we see in this line is this word chang, which means strong. That's part of the forceful accomplishment segment there. So this word chang means strength of the physical body, uprightness of the structure. So many of you may remember that the name for du number 1 is long and strong. It's this word chang for strong. So that word strong is associated with the strength of the bony tissue, the strength of the spine, strength of the dumai. So this is one of the things that the kidney allows us to do. It gives us this sort of physical vigor and physical strength. The kidney, as the most yin of the 5 viscera, then tracks to the most dense of our body parts, which means the bones, that which gives us our actual physical structure. When in a state of disease, the word Chang is a character in Chinese that can be read 2 different ways. One of the other readings of the character is Jiang, which means rigid. So a healthy strength is a suppleness of strength. A diseased strength is a rigidity. And so over time, we can either grow old and maintain our suppleness and maintain our physical strength that has flexibility, also maintain emotional strength that has flexibility. One of my teachers said that the problem of aging, one of the problems of aging, not all of them, but one of the problems of aging is not hardening of the arteries, it's hardening of the attitude. So we need to maintain mental flexibility and strength, as well as physical flexibility and strength. And the flip side of that is rigidity. Rigidity can be symbolic rigidity or it can be physical rigidity, which is why cold is the symbolic disease presentation of water, right? Because it's the opposite of the flexibility and suppleness of water becomes the rigidity that becomes present in some patients. So kidney, we all know, is also associated with, hold on, gotta get out of that. Kidney is associated with winter. And so what is winter? Winter is the time period where the sunlight goes into storage. So this character in blue here is an early sort of seal script version of the character for Dong, which means winter. And what you see here is that circle with a dot in the middle, that's the sun. So the character for winter itself is derived from a very early Chinese character where it's an upside down vase or an upside down container where the sun has gone up and inside into a state of storage. Right? So the healthy kidney is the kidney that, what does it do? That maintains fullness. So the healthy kidney is one that holds on to vital substance, but does it without rigidity, right? So what this comes down to here is that kidney is the ultimate symbol of putting things back into storage. So this is from the 2nd chapter of the Suen, where it talks about winter, and winter means storing and holding, right? That's why it says we have to go to bed early, we have to wake up late, we have to wait for the sun to come out, because we need to be able to sort of hold onto and guard our vital substance. So what I'm going to suggest is that kidney not only means actual kidney, but what it means eventually is all of the organs' ability to hold on to their vital substance, so that none of the organs have a state of depletion. The liver has a kidney. The heart has a kidney. Spleen, lung, kidney, they all have a kidney. And the kidney is the symbolic ability of those organs to maintain fullness. So what we see as a basic theory of aging and the prerequisites to stave off aging is basically twofold. In my opinion, there are only 2 really things we need to work on most. One is the body's ability to hold on to vital substance, whether we define it as qi, blood, Jing essence, source, fluids, I don't care, but we have to have adequate essence or adequate substance. The second criteria is that it has to be moving. It can't be stagnant, which is why we'll see at the end of the lecture today, there's no, everyone should be exercising as one of their therapies. There's no person that I've ever met for whom some sort of movement is not an appropriate, some sort of movement, right? Not the same sort of movement for everybody. Why? Because movement keeps things moving, right? Keeps things active. I'll give you another example of a patient. I haven't seen this patient in a couple of years. I think she may have moved out of state. She was in her mid-late 80s when I last saw her, and she had taken up swimming when she was, I think, 70 years old. But she walked incessantly. She walked everywhere. She swam every day at the YMCA. One day when I was getting ready to have her go onto the table for treatment, I remember typically we'll have to say, okay, take your shoes and socks off. You can roll up your pant legs so I can get to your lower legs and hop up on the table. As she was doing that, I was, preparing my hands with sanitizer and getting some cotton balls and needles ready. I just looked at her and she had turned away from me and was rolling up her pant legs. And I looked at her, at the back of her calves. And we know that some people, even the back of their calves looked aged and worn, or there are lots of varicosities, small spider nevi, you name it. If I did not know who she was and how old she was, I would have sworn that I was looking at the legs of a 30-year-old, right? So her keeping moving, she was on no medication. She had no major complaint. She just needed to keep balance. She was one of the few patients who came in just to keep balance. So the two basic things that break down as part of the theory of aging, and this is, just an overview, is the ability of the body to hold on to substance and the ability of the body to continue circulating substance. And the way we prevent aging and treat many of these conditions is by looking at those two specific goals. Okay. That's the ultimate meaning of kidney, though. So kidney can actually mean kidney, but kidney can also be that ability of our body to hold on to, right? In a good way, not necessarily in a bad way. Holding on to in a bad way becomes a pathological state. That's the introduction to some of the basic concepts of aging. Any specific questions? I'll pull up questions. Any specific questions before we go on? I'll give you just a second to type in. Like I said, we'll have time for questions a little later on, but I want to make sure and questions specifically on point. Someone asked about the clock. So the clock itself, this was just an idea for us to look at. This is not the clock in terms of the channel clock, like the channel circulation, although they're integrated. This is the idea of what is the movement of the 5 phases going around, with one phase being this beginning of the cycle, right? One being the culmination of the growth, one being the harvesting in and the bringing down, and the last one is that movement of storage. So forceful accomplishment, explained or rephrased. I will suggest that you go back to Unschuld's text, his translation. There, you'll read some of the commentary there. The thing that I want us to focus on is that one of the implications for that line is that the kidney is about this ability of the body to maintain that physical strength. That physical vigor is an aspect of kidney, which is why we focus on kidney so much in aging with Chinese medicine. Someone also asked about kidney in ancient texts. Should we always think of it as the ability to store? It's not always. So when we read the texts, we have to be able to read it on multiple levels. Sometimes it's the ability to store. So for example, when we go back to that previous line in the Suen, where it says the kidney qi is in surplus. And that's from the Suen chapter 1 as one of the basic prerequisites of long-term health. I think that means both the kidney channel, kidney zang, as well as all of the organs' ability to hold onto substance. Sometimes it's more symbolic when they describe it in nature, and sometimes it's more kidney, right? So I don't think you can give someone, for example, a shenchuan, kidney pill, for any organ problem, right? That's not what I want to be careful. That's not what I'm saying. When we're reading some things, it's very sort of symptom and sign specific, right? So low back pain doesn't go, actually low back pain probably does go with all the organs, but certain symptoms don't go with all the organs. Certain symptoms go with the kidney specific. Sometimes when they say kidney or water, it can mean more symbolically of all organs and all organ functions. Remember, even in acupuncture, right? In acupuncture, we have Jing, Ying, Shu, Jing, He points, right? Jing well, Ing spring, Shu stream, Jing river, and He uniting points. That means every channel of the 12 channels has a kidney on it. Every channel has a water phase on it. Okay, so we see this image of kidney in all of the channels, in all of the organ functions. Good. All right. Any other brief questions? So someone asked about what point does strength become rigid? That depends on the person, right? You can have people's strength become rigid fairly young in life, or fairly old and almost never. But that rigidity is something that we need to watch for as clinicians and watch for in ourselves. It highlights the importance of all sorts of, again, movement therapy. All right, why don't we? It's 1:10 on the East Coast. The next section is starting a new segment. So rather than start a new segment, let's take a little break here. Why don't we take a 15-minute pause? So Donna, you can. Thank you for Pacific Standard Time. Will be 10:25. If you're on the East Coast, we'll be back at 1:25, and so we'll take a breather here, and then we'll come back. And then you can, if you have other questions, we can type them in. Donna can collate, and we'll continue on.